This week, the Trump Justice Department is threatening criminal charges over a protest in a church. Not a riot, not a violent outburst, a protest in a church. All of this happening while the Pentagon is preparing troops, the FBI has surged more agents in Minneapolis, another person died in ICE custody, and ICE detention has hit record highs. And the person that's being threatened on notice by the Department of Justice, a journalist who's trying to show you everything that's happening on the ground. This is not a coincidence. This is escalation. According to new reporting from NBC News, the Department of Justice under Civil Rights Chief Harmeet Dhillon threatened legal action against protesters who disrupted church services in St. Paul during an anti-ICE demonstration. This NBC report found that the DOJ framed the protests as potentially criminal, even though it happened in a place of worship with zero violent outbursts. It didn't stop there. The Department of Justice has also publicly criticized Don Lemon, warning him after he covered the protests and defended it as free speech. This wasn't private correspondence. They didn't send a message out to Don Lemon personally. They did it public for a reason. They want this to be established precedent that you should not cause disruption. Any documentation of protesters committing nonviolent acts of protest will be brought down with punishments from the Department of Justice. Let's watch the full Don Lemon coverage to see what potential criminal activity the Department of Justice is warning about.
An operation that is secret, that they invited folks out.
This is Operation Pull Up, more of a clandestine operation. We show up somewhere. They don't expect us to come there, and then we disrupt business as usual.
So right now it's kind of mayhem. We're not part of the activists, but we're here just reporting on them. Did they explain to you why they're here?
They did not.
They said that there is someone here, Easterwood, someone who is...
That was a funny question to me. Like, did they explain to you why they're here? Are they not yelling exactly why they're here? They're saying we're demanding ICE out of our neighborhoods. A member of your clergy is a part of ICE, and they're claiming to be accepting to the community, wanting to bring about Jesus's teachings, yet they are violently detaining people from their homes, even though they might not have violent criminal records. Like, it doesn't really make sense. And I feel like people should know why they're there. The protesters are yelling pretty loudly why they're there.
Member of ICE, and he's a pastor of the church.
Our church had gathered for worship, which we do every Sunday. We asked them to leave, and they obviously have not left.
So this is what the First Amendment is about the freedom to protest.
There's varying array of views in this church on politics of immigration. Recognize the complexity of the issue.
This shows you just how divided America is. When you look at the protesters here, and then you look at the people there who are praying, and you know what was the interesting thing? If these two groups could just get together, they might figure out what to do.
I don't necessarily agree with everything that's going on in the Twin Cities right now, but I don't think it's good to fight fire with fire. I think it's good to speak up. I think it's good to protest, but I think it's better to do it in a peaceful way.
Yeah, that was interesting to watch.
Look, I do not agree with a lot of Don Lemon's takes. I don't like the enlightened centrism of we all just need to hold hands and talk about things, and maybe we won't see state-sponsored terrorism on some of the most vulnerable communities in this country. But I do believe that he has a right to document and give his opinion, which the Trump administration clearly does not believe. I mean, Don Lemon, by every stretch of the imagination, is a center-left person. That's the most radical he could be, is a DNC cheerleader. So I do not know why they're categorizing him as this violent agitator. If you ask any leftists who might believe that violence is necessary in order to spark more outrage for certain issues, they're not going to claim Don Lemon as this radical agitator.
This guy here, look, he's hugging his kid. And, you know, I imagine it's uncomfortable and traumatic for the people here. They think you lost and this didn't accomplish anything, and you went into their house, the house of the Lord.
The reality is the house of the Lord is a place where love lives. It's not a place where you can have a pastor masquerading as the director for the field office of ICE in St. Paul.
This is
I think that's the most powerful sentence right there at the end. A lot of people are going to say, hey, you can protest all you want, but really, do you got to do that in a church? A church is supposed to be a place of harmony where people can gather and spread love. Totally understand that churches are very impactful for building community, especially in rural areas in the country. I'm not against churches, But I think that when people continue to see their demonstrations not yield any success, when Kristi Noem says, because of these protesters, we're going to send more ICE agents to infiltrate these communities, what else do you expect people to do? They're going to try to get their voice out no matter what. And they know with this administration that continues to signal they are a Christian nationalist ideology, if they do demonstrations in a church, this will get national coverage. And the Trump administration is giving them exactly what they wanted. Trump is highlighting this as a terrible case of protesting and people trying to use the First Amendment too far. We believe in people's right to disrupt against the government. Just don't disrupt too hard, or we'll take away those freedoms and rights. No, that's not what a right is. A right is not a privilege. It is a right. It should be guaranteed to you, regardless of where you are. And the only limitations of the First Amendment are inciting calls to violence or potentially harming the public. This is not harming the public. It is an inconvenience to those people who are at the church. They are yelling over people who are worshiping and praying, but they need their voice to be heard. And unless there are substantial changes in the administration's behavior, these demonstrations will not stop, regardless of where it is. It's a church or it's a workplace, it's a school. People will make their voice heard. And that is what history shows. To show the seriousness of the situation, Harmeet Dhillon went on distinguished political voice Benny Johnson's podcast. And that's where she continued to escalate the federal government's response to Don Lemon and these protesters. On air, she argues the possibility of evoking the Enforcement Act of 1871, which is better known as the Ku Klux Klan Act. That's important. Can we just emphasize that for a moment? The Ku Klux Klan Act, the Reconstruction era law that was written to stop white supremacist terror, that Dhillon is now saying can be used as a tool to prosecute those that oppose ICE terror. This was a bill that was passed after the Civil War to protect Black Americans from organized racial violence when local governments refused to protect them. And she completely flips the history on its head when she talks about it here.
It is on screen. First time I've heard it mentioned. Can you unpack this for us, Harmeet?
Yeah, the Klan Act is one of the most important federal civil rights statutes, and it goes back to the time when President Lincoln emancipated the slaves, and yet the southern states, Dixiecrats mainly, were refusing to give them equal rights. And in fact, that you had sheriffs and you had law enforcement harassing the newly freed slaves.
I love whenever conservatives bring up how racist Southern Democrats were, which is completely true, by the way. That does not have anything to do, though, with party ideology. Party ideologies are malleable. They switch with different electorate blocks. And that is why we see most of the racist South switch to the Republicans after Barry Goldwater promised to not force integration. They wanted more racial segregation in the South, which is why they flipped to the Republican Party. So just reject any Republican that tries to tell you that is the Democrats are the real racist. You think any white supremacist is going to be voting for fucking Kamala Harris? Tell me that.
So the Klan Act is a law that makes it illegal to terrorize citizens, to violate their civil rights, to get together and conspire to violate the civil rights. It is often used against law enforcement, but is now used against others as well. So whenever anyone conspires to violate the protected civil rights of American citizens, the Klan Act can be used to bring a conspiracy charge.
He's arguing here that whenever someone conspires to violate the protected civil rights of American citizens, the Klan Act should be used, including against protesters who are using their First Amendment right in order to demand changes from the government. This is really important, and it really matters for two big reasons. The first is she is stretching civil rights protection statute into a weapon against political dissent. A statute that is intended for civil rights protection, she's using to punish protesters who are mad about an authoritarian government. And the second big thing is she is signaling that the protest itself may now be treated as a civil rights violation, not an exercise of someone's First Amendment rights. This is not law enforcement just drifting. This is ideological intent and weaponizing government statutes in order to punish political dissidents. To understand how extreme that is, you need the full context. And all of this traces back to Operation Metro Surge, which was the massive escalation of federal immigration enforcement in Minneapolis and St. Paul, where raids intensified, detentions continued to increase, and the federal presence expanded to every aspect of the city. Renee Nicole Good, from all of this, was shot in the face 3 times by an ICE agent after posing no physical threats to the ICE agents that were present there. Protests followed after that, not randomly, but predictably, and Reuters reported that a federal judge has now demanded that the government's response must be proportional and has issued an injunction limiting immigration agents' conduct towards protesters. A federal judge in Minnesota on Friday ordered U.S. immigration agents deployed en masse to Minneapolis to curb some of the tactics they've used against observers and protesters of their enforcement actions. Handing a victory to local activists in Minnesota's most populous city, U.S. District Judge Kate Menendez issued an injunction barring federal agents from retaliating against individuals engaged in peaceful, unobstructive protest activity. This Reuters article is highlighting really important things. This federal judge barred arbitrary detentions, like what we saw with a preschool teacher in Grand Rapids who was arrested on camera purposefully. So that way, the federal government showed they can just arrest anybody they view as a political dissident. It also bars the use of force without reasonable suspicion. You cannot just detain somebody because you're trying to disperse the area. You have to detain people who pose a clear threat. You need reasonable suspicion to take somebody into custody. But instead of complying, the Trump administration is trying to fight the ruling. CNN has reported that the administration asked the judge to reject Minnesota's attempt to stop immigration crackdown altogether. The Department of Justice asked a federal judge Monday to reject a bid by Minnesota leaders to block President Trump's sweeping immigration crackdown and to allow the surge of immigration agents in the state to move forward after a lawsuit was brought by Minnesota and Twin Cities claiming the move was unconstitutional. At the same time that Donald Trump is trying to get away from a federal judge's demands, we're also seeing escalation in Alaska, where Donald Trump has said that 1,500 active duty soldiers need to prepare for a possible deployment to Minnesota, the site of a large protest against the government's deportation drive, two U.S. officials told Reuters on Sunday. The U.S. Army placed the units on prepare to deploy orders in case violence in the Midwestern state escalates, the official said, though it is not clear whether any of them will be sent. President Trump on Thursday threatened to use the Insurrection Act to deploy military forces if officials in state do not stop protesters from targeting immigration officers after a surge in Immigration and Customs Enforcement's agents. Trump, a Republican, sent the surge of federal immigration agents to Minneapolis and neighboring St. Paul early last week as part of a wave of interventions across the U.S., mostly to cities run by Democratic politicians. He said troop deployments in Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Memphis, and Portland, Oregon are necessary to fight crime and protect federal property and personnel from protesters. But this month, he said he was removing the National Guard from Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland, where the deployments have faced legal setbacks and challenges. So, on top of all of this, the federal government stomping out states' sovereignty, the Department of Justice threatening to use Reconstruction era anti KKK laws to prosecute modern protesters, the president is threatening to use the Insurrection Act, which utilizes military force against the civilian population. None of this is a coincidence. All of this is the consolidation of power and to demonstrate how forceful the state can stomp out political dissent. While the Department of Justice is focusing on church disruptions and conspiracy theories, CBS News reports that ICE's detainee population has reached a record high of over 73,000 people. I need to take that number in. 73,000 people are being held in ICE detainment. This is already in a country where we have the largest incarceration rate in the entire world. How does this make us safe? If detaining people really created a safer society, we should have the least amount of crime in the world. We have the largest incarceration rate out of any other country in the entire planet. And yet we still have crime that the Trump administration says will be fixed by more incarcerations. Former senior U.S. immigration officials said they were not aware of any other period in American history where the U.S. government had held more people in immigration detention. U.S. number one again, baby. We know people being held in these immigration facilities are experiencing lack of proper nutrition and proper care. ICE says a Cuban immigrant died while attempting suicide, even though a witness says that guards pinned and choked him. So ICE claimed that this person died from a suicide attempt, but a witness told the Associated Press that Lunas Campos died after he was handcuffed, tackled by guards, and placed in a chokehold until he lost consciousness. The immigrant's family was told by the El Paso County Medical Examiner's Office on Wednesday that a preliminary autopsy report said that the death was a homicide resulting from asphyxia from the chest and neck compression, according to a recording of the call reviewed by the Associated Press. The death and the conflicting accounts have intensified scrutiny into the conditions of immigration jails at a time when the government has been rounding up immigrants in large numbers around the county and detaining them at facilities like the one in El Paso where Lunas Campos died. We are increasing the probability that more people will die in these facilities. This is the largest point in history that we have had the most amount of people detained by ICE. And if you don't think that this is going to be a continued pattern, if you're viewing this as just a one off case or an outlier, you are horribly mistaken. More people will die at the hands of ICE. We are acting without proper care. We're trying to take as many people as possible, we as in the federal government, and ICE will not stop until they raise up those quota numbers. They don't care if they're doing it the right way. They don't care if they're doing it the legal way. They don't care if state officials are demanding that they remove themselves from the city. They will get as many people as possible to round up those numbers, even if that means forcing them into detention facilities where they don't receive proper care, they don't have communication with their loved ones, and they're taken to counties that they've never even stepped foot into. We started this video speaking about the church protests that happened in the Minneapolis St. Paul area. And churches have historically been a place when the state becomes unresponsive to start civil rights movements, be sanctuary for people that are fleeing from oppressive regimes, and for labor organizing. Invoking the Ku Klux Klan Act in response to a protest inside a church is not irony, it is inversion. Of course, a federal government who does not care about increased detainee deaths in ICE facilities is going to bend the law to do their bidding. Using an anti KKK law in order to stomp out protesters, especially in churches where historically churches have been a place of organizing for civil rights movements, sanctuary for political refugees, and even labor organizing, this is a government who does not care. It is not just because it's irony or it's funny, it is a explicit inversion of the law, and it's used to demonstrate federal power. We need to stop this pattern, or else we will continue to see the court set limits on the Trump administration and the executive completely ignoring them. Troops that are readied in order to be used against American citizens, and agents that are continue to surge in communities that demand that they leave. Protests cannot be reframed as conspiracy. These are people who are demanding change from their government, and civil rights laws cannot be repurposed to be punishment for political dissent. The combination of all of this federal escalation does not restore order. It's going to create more instability in regions where people need change to happen. The question is not whether or not dissent will continue to happen. It's whether those in positions of power will recognize the historical pattern of what happens when governments treat protests like criminal activity.